Forget for a second everything you know about the Tesla Model 3, and also forget maybe your beef with Elon Musk, because the new Model 3 Performance asks you one simple question. What are you willing to sacrifice to be the fastest car on the road? Let's find out.
The new Model 3 Performance is faster than ever. It has more than double the power of the entry-level Model 3 rear-wheel drive, and yet at the time we shot this video, it only costs about $22,000 more. For that comparatively cheap sum, the Performance nearly halves the Model 3's claimed 0 to 100 km/h sprint time from 6.1 seconds down to a wild 3.1 seconds. So if you care about being pretty much the fastest car on the road, there's no more affordable way to do it. Let's take a look at rivals. The closest in terms of size and intent is, of course, the Polestar 2 dual motor with the Performance Pack, and that comes in at $85,400. But for people who want to split the difference in numbers, not only is the Polestar more expensive, but it's also over a full second slower to 100 km/h, a relative eternity. Looking further afield, there's the Hyundai Ioniq 5N, Kia EV6 GT, and the Mustang Mach-E GT, but you'll find these SUV-sized vehicles are a bit more expensive and still somehow not quite as fast. Perhaps the only car which will give you pause for thought then is BYD's Seal Performance. Again, it's not outright as fast as the Model 3, but it's getting pretty close, and it manages to do so at an impressive price tag. Still, and this will probably be enough for some, when it boils down to pure numbers and bragging rights, the Model 3 Performance is the most affordable way to go faster than most exotic supercars. Seriously, it's faster to 100 km than a Lamborghini Huracan or a Ferrari Roma, or even lower grade versions of the Porsche Taycan. The only trouble is, aside from a handful of aesthetic upgrades, it gets the same equipment as the already very fast and very well equipped base Model 3. And this includes things like LED headlights, synthetic leather interior trim, the central 15-inch multimedia screen and control panel, always online connectivity, and the rest of the clever software stuff. For more on the standard equipment, check out our full review at carsguide.com.au. But aside from the extra power, the Performance grade also nets you bucket seats, adaptive suspension, 20-inch forged alloy wheels, a performance brake package, as well as a unique track driving mode. Sure, some premium brands would charge you far more for far less, but the upgrades to the Performance are very much unseen, especially on the inside. It's hard to feel where your money has gone until you drive it, which brings us nicely to its overall design.
Now, the Model 3 Performance really doesn't add anything in the way of crazy styling to let you know what it is or even how fast it is. In fact, from a distance, it's pretty hard to tell this version apart from just any other Tesla on the road. That kind of handsome but anonymous sort of vibe. There's something to be said for the subtlety of it, but you're certainly not getting a whole lot in terms of styling for your extra spend.
There are some highlights though. Primarily, there's some cool new wheels, as well as some tastefully minimalist aero pieces up front and round the rear. Inside is also very subtle, and it really sticks to the Model 3 formula.
Yep, it's a pretty standard Tesla Model 3 fare in here. There's not really anything dramatically different about this interior, with the biggest change, and probably the best change, being these big bucket seats. They've been redesigned this time around and they really hold you in place. I actually really like them. The handful of other changes you get, well, you get a little sort of carbon touch across the top of the dash there and some suede lining in the doors, but that's sort of it. You have to really like the Model 3 to like this version of it. Part of what has always set Tesla apart though has been its ultra slick software, and it's still pretty much the best on the market. I can't think of any software suite from any other automaker which even starts to compete with this. It's super fast, it's super slick, it looks really good, but it does come with a bunch of compromises. Obviously, you now have to control the drive mode through the screen, which is a bit odd, and obviously there's no Apple CarPlay, so there might be some apps that you can't use, although the app library is starting to get bigger and bigger. I've noticed a few software updates for this car have rolled out a few more of those, which is nice to see. And also the big thing about Teslas is there's no dashboard or holographic head-up display even on this top spec Performance variant, and that's a little weird to get used to. Now, when it comes to practicality, there are a bunch of compromises here as well. Yes, the cabin's not too bad. There's nice pockets in the doors, for example. It's really easy to find a nice seating position. It's really adjustable. Everything is memory settings, so you just set it and then you hit OK on the thing and it will remember all of your settings. You get two wireless phone chargers in there. Nice big storage area down here and one for your 500ml bottle here, no problems. You can fit that easily. And there's also USB-C outlets in here. Nice big center console box as well. And the seats are nice and comfy and they hold you in place during that drive too. But one of the biggest compromises I found, yes, you've got to control the drive mode through the screen, and your indicators are on the steering wheel now, which was one of the biggest changes when we came to the updated Model 3. Funnily enough, I got used to these really quickly. It was more the drive mode selector that was weird, because normally with a drive mode selector, you push it down or pull it towards you to go into drive, but for this one, it's the opposite. You push the little car forward on the thing to go forward. Weird. The other thing was, I sat in this car this morning to come to this video shoot, and it had decided to do a software update, and the car was pretty much bricked for about 20 minutes. So make sure you don't accidentally initiate a software update if you need to go somewhere, and you better hope you don't do it in an emergency. Let's go have a look in the back seat. Now, if you think the sort of minimal amount had changed in the front seat of the Model 3 Performance, even less has changed in the back seat here. As you can see, you don't get the same kind of bucket seat treatment for this rear bench, which means that if you're trying to scare your rear passengers, they've got less to hold them in place and they're going to move about a bit more. So keep that in mind. One of the biggest changes is there's no pockets on the backs of these new bucket front seats here. There's just sort of like a flat finish to them, but you still do get these nice big bottle holders in the doors, and a further two in this drop down armrest, although they're a little small for our big bottle, so that's worth keeping in mind. Space generally though is pretty good. So I've got quite a bit of room. That's behind my own seating position, quite a bit of room for my knees. My head is okay, although that's only because of this glass roof. You wouldn't want to be too much taller than me. Width though is excellent, and the floor is nice and flat, so there's always somewhere for your feet to go, and adults can genuinely use that middle position. That's nice to see. Now, one of the biggest changes for the updated Model 3 this time around was the inclusion of this new rear panel on the back of the center console. It's got its own touchscreen climate controls just like in the front, but it's also got some seat controls. It's got some multimedia settings, so you can watch Netflix back here or whatever you want to do. That's kind of cool. There's obviously adjustable air vents through that touchscreen, but there's also USB-C outlets if you need to charge something. One thing this car doesn't get that a lot of its rivals are starting to get is a 3-pin household outlet, so you can't charge those kinds of devices from this car, just USB-C.
Boot space measures in with solid numbers. See those on your screen right now. But in the real world, the space is much harder to use than the numbers suggest because it's a sedan and much of the boot capacity is actually under the floor. As a bonus though, you get a decently sized frunk, which fit our smallest case nice and snugly.
Now, the new Model 3 Performance is more than twice as powerful as the base Model 3, and that car was already fast enough. In fact, it's so powerful and it's so fast that the numbers almost don't seem to matter, and that's thanks to a new performance drive unit on the rear axle. That's codenamed 4D2, that puts out more power than before, about 30-something% more than the previous Model 3 Performance, and that's a lot. So, Model 3 Performance. Obviously, one of the biggest reasons to buy one of these is that ridiculous 0 to 100 kilometer per hour sprint time. So let's get that out of the way first, shall we? Now, we don't really have a private road to test it on truly from 0 to 100, but just to give you a visual idea, and probably the closest you're going to get legally on the road, we're just going to use a freeway on-ramp where I can go from something slow to 100 kilometers an hour and give you a bit of an idea of doing 47, 52, let's just slam it. It sort of never gets old. I've done that a few times now, and yeah, great party trick. It's so stupidly fast. I don't know what the point of having that much speed is, but it is hilarious. How much that's worth to you though, well, that's kind of the big question with this car. After all, this is $22,000, something like that, more expensive than the standard Model 3, and that's what it does. But your other question is, well, does it even handle? It's one thing to be fast in a straight line, but can it go around a corner with any kind of speed, especially with the weight of the batteries under the floor? Well, you might be surprised. See, the thing is, the Model 3 is big and heavy, and the steering is sort of a little weird and artificial, but the computers, well, this car is so clever. It will just hold on to a corner like its life depends on it. There's not even a squeal or a squeak out of the tires, just like when you're doing that 0 to 100. It's actually incredible. In fact, I'd go so far as to say it's too smart. See, the thing is, without a bit of that craziness about it, without a bit of that slip and slide here and there, without a bit of that danger, there's just an element of fun that kind of goes missing. This car is too good at holding onto the road. It's too clever in terms of its computers and its torque vectoring and all the things that it's doing. When you've really got it on a curvy road and probably even on a track, you can feel the computers move the torque around back and forth between the two axles to keep this car staying in control of itself. It's almost as though you're not doing the driving. It's almost as though it's unrealistic. It's too clever. It feels like a disconnected experience. It's incredible. It's a feat of engineering. It is so fast, both in a straight line and around corners, but I do just wish it was a little bit more fun. Now, obviously there are a bunch of ways that you can modify the driving experience of this car, because if you don't like the insane acceleration mode that this car comes with, you can turn it down. You can make it feel like a lesser Model 3 grade. You can also tweak the steering. It's got 3 modes. It's got light, standard, and heavy, all of which feel kind of a little bit weird and artificial, but all of which keep the car sort of razor sharp and pointed where you need to go. I quite like the light mode, to be honest, but there is a use for that kind of standard and performance steering mode when you're in the corners, I've got to say. And when it comes to slowing down, well, this car can properly slow down too. In fact, when you're out on some curvy roads, or probably even on the track, we haven't had it on the track so we can't tell you, but by the time you go to put your foot on the brake pedal, you might find that the regen has already slowed you down enough. And that's kind of the funny thing, because if you do take this car out on a bit of a fun driving session, it won't reek of brake pads and tires when you get it to the end, because the computers control the amount of traction going to the tires, so they're not getting absolutely shredded, and you don't really need to use the brakes as much, so they don't get cooked. It's all a bit strange. Now, if you haven't driven a Model 3 before, particularly this update, there are a few things that we should call out when it comes to the general drive experience. One of which is obviously there are no stalks anymore, so it will take a little bit of getting used to use these indicators on the steering wheel, kind of like a certain Ferrari model. But surprisingly, I found I got used to them really quickly, and you find that you sort of don't miss the stalks after a little while, maybe even just a day or two of driving this car, so that was surprising to find. The other thing is you kind of get to see into the brain of this car with the radar screen. It's really cool the way that it sort of grabs objects and classifies them, and it gives you a bit of confidence that the car does actually know what's going on around it, and then that safety suite will really have your back. Now, what about the ride? Because that's usually one of the biggest downsides for a lot of these electric cars, especially these low slung and performance oriented ones that have quite crashy rides. There's a lot of battery packs under the floor that need to be controlled by the poor suspension. I've got to say though, the Model 3 update has gone a long way to bring that under control. It used to be very sort of crashy, and you would cringe if you saw a bit of nasty road coming up. But thanks to this upgrade, even the mounting points where the suspension joins the body have been changed, and it's made a really big difference for ride quality. Here in the performance, it is firmer, and there is an element of that previous car in here, but it's not terrible. You'll still try to avoid bumps where you can, because those 20-inch wheels do let quite a bit more into the cabin than the base rear-wheel drive, but on the whole, I'm pretty impressed with the ride. It is what you expect from a performance car, and that's fine. And obviously, and again, if you haven't driven a Model 3 before, there is a little bit of weirdness to get used to when it comes to everything being controlled through that central touchscreen. You've got no dash, so you have to keep an eye on your speed in the corner of the screen, and you'd be surprised how odd that is. I find, having your eyes go up and down to look at a dashboard is much easier when you're concentrating on the road than it is to look sideways, to look over at your speed on this central cluster. But again, it's a thing that you will get used to over time. And it's not only that, because all the controls still run through this touchscreen. You've probably heard us complain about touchscreen controls before, but it is really distracting while you're driving, because there's no feedback when you're searching for buttons to press, and the toggles and things on the menus, especially in the Teslas, can be quite small. and they can be quite hard to jab at when you're trying to concentrate on the road. So that's worth keeping in mind as well. Now, there are some other downsides from going to the performance grade, and one of those is the amount of sound which enters the cabin. Now, Tesla did a lot of work for this update to make sure that the amount of sound entering the cabin was reduced. They added an acoustic bit of glass in the front, they added a lot of sound deadening. And I don't know if you can hear it on the mic, but it is kind of noisy in here. Like, we're on the freeway now, we're doing 90, now 100 kilometers an hour, and it's pretty noisy, much noisier than what I noticed when I was driving the rear-wheel drive some 6 months ago now. And that's going to be down to the fact that this car's got proper performance tires and massive 20-inch wheels. It is quite a bit noisier, so something to keep in mind when you're considering this against other grades, or you're going to spend a lot of time on the freeway. Now, of course, it wouldn't be a Tesla review if we didn't mention the auto steer feature. Now, we don't have the full autopilot, and you can't really use it in Australia anyway, but full auto steer is something this car does have. Now it's changed a little bit. It used to be stalk activated. Now you double click this little thing on the steering wheel here, and it will steer for you. Now, I'm going to hold the steering wheel just to keep this all above board, but it will do a lot of the steering for you. It is really good. It's probably one of the best systems on the market. I really appreciate the amount of effort that's gone into this system. And in terms of how it compares to the rest of its rivals, I'd say probably Mercedes does a pretty good job of their auto steer feature, their adaptive cruise, but this is probably still the best on the market. And it's one of those areas where Tesla really still does have an advantage.
The Model 3 Performance gets a 79 kilowatt-hour battery pack using nickel manganese cobalt chemistry, or NMC chemistry, granting it a 528 kilometer driving range according to the more accurate WLTP standard. That should be plenty, even compared to rivals at this price. That range number will be dependent on you hitting the average energy consumption number you'll see on your screen now, and we hit reasonably close to that on our testing. The Model 3 is also one of the fastest charging cars in its class. See the peak charging speed claim for both AC and DC charging on your screen now. On a charger capable of the maximum DC speed you see there, you can expect a charge time of around 31 minutes.
Okay, so safety equipment. The Tesla has pretty much all of it, or versions of it, because it's got heaps of cameras. It's constantly surveilling the world around it. As I said before, you get that cool radar screen which shows you everything around you and lets you know that the car's really got your back. Now, obviously, you've got versions of auto emergency braking, blind spot monitoring. It's even got like a little light in the speaker there, so it functions just like blind spot monitoring. It's not just the radar and the chimes telling you that there are cars in your blind spot, so that's a nice addition. And obviously, it's got a really excellent surround kind of parking system that categorizes objects. So you can see people, you can see children, you can see bikes, you can see cars. It makes parking a real breeze, and that's a big benefit of having all of those cameras and systems. So yeah, safety, well, you don't really want for anything. Now, because of all those cameras though, it does have some features that other cars don't have. Like, it's got a chime that tells you when the light goes green, because it can see that. It can see brake lights on cars in front. It can do all sorts of things that are actually quite impressive. And again, it's one of those areas where Tesla is so far ahead on software.
The updated Model 3 is yet to secure a maximum 5-star ANCAP safety rating, and the car has changed heavily enough that the previous version score, which it achieved in 2019, is no longer valid. In good news, however, significant upgrades were made to the Model 3's crash structure for this update to comply with more stringent requirements in the US market. Tesla is behind the pack in offering a 4-year, 80,000 kilometer warranty for the whole vehicle, apart from the high voltage battery pack, which has a much more industry standard warranty of 8 years and 160,000 kilometers.
Also troubling is the fact that there are no service intervals. The Model 3 will tell you when it's ready to go and visit a workshop. And also, it's not very transparent about how much it will cost when you go to that workshop, which is troublesome. Although from what we've seen, the service items that are available on Tesla's website seem reasonably priced.
I also wouldn't buy a Model 3 with high hopes of residual values, especially in the first few years, as the brand has a habit of constantly slashing its pricing and therefore the value of vehicles which are already out there. While values have remained generally pretty strong, the Model 3 is after all quite a desirable vehicle. There's a good chance your immediate depreciation upon delivery will be significant.
The Model 3 performance is an absolute masterwork. It's faster than pretty much everything else on the road. It's got mind-bending handling, and of course, just like all Teslas, it's got the best software in the business. But in its laser-focused pursuit of trying to be the fastest, most controlled car it can be, just like Scrooge McDuck, it lost something along the way. It forgot how to be fun. Now, remember at the beginning of this review when I said this car would ask you what you're willing to sacrifice to be the fastest car on the road? Well, it turns out there's more to the story than just money, but there's no denying the value on offer here. For more on our thoughts on the Model 3, both this one and the base rear-wheel drive, check out our full reviews over at carsguide.com.au.